welcome back to another show. And today I'm going to be talking about Once Upon a Time in the West. And the 4K edition is what I saw on recently. Now, you can watch it in Blu-ray, you can watch it in DVD if you want, and watch it in digital. There's various versions. There's a new Blu-ray 4K. That's the French version because it looks nicer, you know, with the French writing. Now, the interesting thing for this, if you're going to go 4K, is this has been remastered, but it's also been DNR'd a little bit, so it's a bit shiny. So I end up getting this, which is the 4K version, which actually has a bigger disk space and hasn't been shined up. It's 4K, but hasn't been shined up as much as the official Paramount version. And I think it's a much better remaster and better transfer. So that's what I'm using. So I still keep this one because I'm a completionist and I like the size cover, but this is the one I'll be using. But this one is the one that you can get in digital as well. Because I'm a massive Once Upon a Time in the West fan, trust me, I have the digital too. I got it cheap. Right, so but anyway, you get it, it's still a great film. The problem talking about Once Upon a Time in the West is just not turned into, oh, there was this scene, and there was this scene, there was this scene, there was this scene, it's all amazing type of thing. It's very hard to talk about because you instantly, if you're a big fan of it, you turn into a fanboy about how great this was, how great that was. And if you can see, it's one of those best to see on as big a screen as possible, because a lot of the great stuff is in how the film would pause for a second and let you take in the atmosphere and have the music playing and how the camera moves up and down. And now Sergio Leone always liked to move his camera and was really into framing and careful framing, but he also liked to take his time, so it's not like swooshing like you get nowadays. It's much more deliberate and it is beautiful. So the biggest screen as possible. Now I've managed to see it in the cinema before, and I've watched it on projector, and that's the optimal experience to see it. As good a quality you can get it, as big a screen as possible. This is a film that's cinematic as hell. It deserves to be seen on the big screen. Now, at the time, this was the Italian westerns were viewed as like the earlier versions of postmodern filmmaking, in the sense of they were made by directors who had not experienced the subject. They were just doing films about the myths of the subject's been built up over the years. Now that's a little bit unfair though, to be honest, because there's two things that takes away from. The first one is the American directors of the 40s did the same thing. The American directors of the 40s did not live the Western life. The John Ford, Howard Hawks, they were basing these films on the myth of the West that was written down in the Penny Dreadfuls from the 1880s, 1890s that came into the modern Hollywood and were filmed as westerns. So the Western was like an idealized version of the West. It wasn't the reality of the West. Some films would get closer than others, but essentially you're taking a subject you didn't actually live. It was just like it was a genre mechanism for a certain type of story, a certain kind of mythical type of story that would go all the way back to like the Odyssey and all the Greek myths and the Roman stories and the Robin Hood thing. Every culture has their myths which they create. The Western was American myth, and the complexity of the land rights and all the different things with the Indians and thing, and all the atrocities that happened in the West were simplified for the 40s films, really, 30s and 40s films, generally. Some directors managed to suggest there was some more nuance to the situation. In the 50s, you got the Anthony Mann films, which were much more psychological, and you'd get stuff like Red River, and you'd get Searchers, and essentially it would become a bit more of a grown-up genre. And those films kind of gave it legitimacy, but also were probably less popular because people were wanting the myth more than the reality, or a reality that referenced that nothing everything was peachy. So when the Italians came along in the 60s, because they came from a different country, they were influenced by the iconography of the West, the conventions of the Western. what people did with it. But what they did also was bring in their history. And their history was basically fascism. They came from a country, the American Western Italian style came from a country that had been under fascism, that had been fought over by the fascists in the first half of the century, and then after that they had a variety of interests from like the pro-West version or the communists, all try to fight over the country after World War Two, and you'd have a lot of like communist directors doing these films, or directors who were very left and had an intellectual bent, but they were also infusing that into the West and using the Western mythology to create something new. Now, Sergio Leone was less political than some of these directors. Like, if you look at Kabuki with stuff like The Big Silence, there's more political stuff. There's lots of Face to Face, another one that's very political. It's all about the different sides of good behaviour and bad behaviour. A lot of directors found interesting elements. Bullet for the General was all about revolution. Now, Sergio Leone understood that stuff, and he would comment on the stuff, but he was primarily a visual filmmaker. He wanted to make. He loved the West, and he loved the myth of the West. So he just foot in both sides. He did the thing of, I'm creating a myth, but I'm aware of how the Western could be used to comment on things that happen in my country and what happened in America as well. Although the American version is really, it's the stand-in for Italy. Now, as Italy was always a country that always took genres from other places and made their own. I mean, you did the Italian crime film in the 70s were very macho, very French Connection influenced. You did the Gialli, which was the kind of horror movie, thriller, mystery that Hitchcock would do, but then they would take it into their own direction and create this whole beautiful subgenre on its own. So the Italians always made it their own. They always found they couldn't really assimilate so much into what subject they were taking. They had to bring it and make it personal, which is what you're meant to do if you're taking a genre but filming it elsewhere. So they'd film it in Spain, and they would throw the deserts, and they would actually create this sort of counter myth that was much more cynical, much more brutal, but very commercial. They understood the violence played, and you needed the violence, and that would cover the other stuff you're doing. I mean, a lot of like countries kind of take that kind of style and then build from it. I mean, if you look at Asia, they started off with the commercial cinema was like basically they could be samurai, they could be kung fu, and then you'd build upon an art cinema beyond that as well, and do some more thoughtful things. But the base for the commercial cinema going was like these genres, which you could then find your way through. And Italy's the same way. I mean, most commercial cinema is the same way. It's like, what do people like? We do that to make the money, and then we do that house stuff later as well. It's paid for by the success of these other films. You know, that's just a healthy film industry. And Italy did that, but they were boom and bust. They'd invest so much in the new boom thing, then it would bust, they'd wait for another genre to come along. So that explains the history of what this film is. It's basically a film made with love for the old genres, but also had a kind of political side that's based on Italy. So there's a cynicism about, there's a genuine cynicism about progress, what it means to people, and how it's all like progress is going to be corrupted. But there's also romanticism about the need for progress, the need for creating something new out of the land, and so it is. This film has its foot in both sides, and that's what's perfect about it. It managed to get it perfectly. You get the hope, but you also get the cynicism, and both work against each other beautifully. Rather than like cancelling each other out, they both inform the other, which works really well. Also, they managed to bring in people as actors who Someone like Henry Fonda, who was an icon of the West in the first place. He worked with John Ford. He played Abraham Lincoln. He played, you know, Wyatt Earp. He'd been these iconic. He played these iconic characters, and he was the epitome of the hope of the West. And here he was playing the villain. So that was the cynicism. But you also got Claudia Cardinal as the hope of the West. She was the one who was trying to bring the West through the darkness into some sort of light, which was just basically helping build a railroad town, a new town that's heading westward that her husband had started before he was murdered by Fonda. And it's just the idea of progress, slow making progress. In between these two extremes, you have Charles Bronson and you have Jason Robards as two people who are from the Bronson era of basically being murderers and being like criminals and basically being leeches on society in some way. Although you never quite know with Bronson's character what he was. He played a bounty hunter dealing with criminals, but he's obviously very smart. But they're both characters who are tied to the old way of life and who don't really have much of a function when civilization comes along and takes over the West. And they know it's coming, and they know their lives are basically over when it happens. But yet they're helping Claudia Cardinal, who's the epitome of that advance against, Henry Fonda and his employee, who are the guys who's a guy in the train who's buying up all these towns, who's building the railroads, and who's making all this money, but he's going to die before he can ever use any of it. So he's got a vision of what he wants to do, but it's been corrupted by just general life and general ambition. And he has to work with people like Henry Fonda's character, who is just the worst. So you've got these two characters in the middle, who Bronson, who's cynical but has a romanticism to him as well. Like, he understands the need for progress. And Jason Robards is Cheyenne, who's a robber. He's like done a lot of bad stuff in his time, but he does have a romantic side to him as well. He does understand the way things are going, that he is wanted by the police, and it's going to end for him badly at some point. But in the last grasp of his life, basically, in the last few days, he tries to do the right thing and help Cardinal and help Bronson defeat Fonda. And he's a kind of human character, because you've got these two bits of iconography, Cardinal and Fonda. Then you have Bronson, a different type of iconographies that's like basically the silent type who notices all and is amused by all, but is distant from humanity. And you've got Cheyenne, who's much more human than anyone else, and who's much more flawed than anyone else, but you can identify with him because he has got a kind of common sense reality of the way most people would live. So you've got these four characters basically orbiting each other, and slowly but surely it's like just waiting for the fireworks to go off, and they interact with each other and they manipulate each other. But slowly but surely the battle lines are drawn. Basically it's Bronson, Cardinal and Robards on one side, and Fonda and his cronies on the other side. And as you go on, you find out much more about why Bronson's after Fonda. And I mean, those who've seen the film know it's a great reason, and it's a great, when it pays off, it really pays off. But you don't want to say anything about it in case anyone hasn't seen it. But it is pretty stunning what it actually is, what the actual reason is. And again, it's done by Leone as a visual masterpiece style. Basically, it's like, how do we use all of these story ideas in the most efficient way possible, in the most powerful way possible? And he's just soaked in that kind of storytelling, having both work together, because Leone started the spaghetti western. Basically, he's the one who, with Fistful of Dollars, it blew up with him, and then he built upon it and made for a few dollars more, which is my favourite of the Dollars trilogy. And then he made The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, which is the best of the Dollars trilogy. I just like for a few dollars more and more. um, but he was building upon it. But those ones with Clint Eastwood were more cynical. There just was the cynicism. There was sides of humanity. In the first one, Eastwood helps a poor family who have been abused by the villains. In the second one, Eastwood helps out Lee Van Cleef's character, the Colonel, who's actually going for revenge for his death of his sister. In the third one, Eastwood and Eli Wallach are going against Lee Van Cleef's villain, do form a kind of flawed humanity with each other, even though they don't really trust one another. And you do comment in the war that's creating all the damage. So there is a slow humanity going through it, but it tends to be there is the cynicism still dominant. It's them fighting through the cynicism of those films. In this one, it's much more balanced between the two, and you do get a sense of like things happen that, like in each Dollars film, what happens then doesn't really matter because the next film Eastwood stops back to try and make more money because he's either lost or he spent it. In the sense of there's not much progress happening in the character. In the this one, in the sense of there is progress with what's going on. Like Cardinal does help set up this town that's going to be important for the expansion into the West. Like Robart's character dies, and it actually means something. And the revenge plot against Fonda means something. And even though some people die, and there is going to be some corruption following what happens, there is still a sense of hope. There's some progress being made there. And some of it's influenced by the writers. I mean, Leone did bring in Dario Argento and Bertolucci to actually write the original story. So Argento and Bernardo Bertolucci were both like young whippersnappers at the time. Were probably very cheap. Let's be honest here, they were cheap. But they were critics. Bertolucci had already made some films, but he was finding it hard to make the films at the time. Argento hadn't made any films yet, but he was another critic. They were both movie mad, and they both adored Leone. And which you can see the influence of Leone on Argento is the idea of the mix between having some sort of knowledge of the world, but also the fantastical side of it, the cinema side of it, is also very important for Argento. And what fantasy does became much more about Argento's thing. Leone was much more about the myth of it, and Argento was much more about the weird psychological hell of it. But they were both like influenced by Leone, and they were brought together to write the story. And then they were replaced by Leone bringing in the normal script writer to finish the job off when it went into production when he realised the script was too long and there had too much stuff in it. But they watched tons of westerns, and they were influenced by lots of westerns, and there was lots of references to westerns in the film. But also because Bertolucci is a political director, and Argento has sly bits of politics in his films. They're not like on the surface, but in the 70s films, you do see a lot of Italy that's actually commenting on what's happening in Italy. Because he's probably much more, at that point, much more like focused on the politics. Because in the 70s, Italy is very, very political. So, that also brought in like kind of idea of they could love the Western, but they could also love the world and put a little bit of the world into it. And Leone would then bring in the romanticism and the kind of dark humour to it. So it's this thing that created this amazing balance of different people coming in, and then Leone hiring the actors and bringing them in, letting them do their thing. While his doing his visual side is like Leone just managed to balance everything off perfectly. In a way, he never quite managed with Duck You Sucker, which came out a few years later, which was much more of a comedy and much more meandering. Even though I adore that film, it is more meandering. And it gets footing back with Once Upon a Time in America later on. But Once Upon a Time in the West is one of those films that just everything comes together. It chose the right people for the right job, and it just delivers. The action is wonderful and very stylized, but it always is on point. You never feel that anything's there for any other reason. Is this is the story I'm telling you. We're not going to extend anything longer than we need to. Everything's always seems to have a point to it. When the plot takes a little sidewind somewhere, it's usually to open up another story elsewhere to get characters out of the way, and you feel the sense of there's always some momentum, there's always some point to what's going on. And Leone actually is aware to actually intercut some fight scenes with some dialogue scenes that actually give you a sense of the characters as well. So it's just one of those films that's perfect. It's just one of the films that just deliver. It's like, this is how you do this type of film. And in a way, it's more arty than anything that an American would ever do. But it's also more beautiful than the Americans would allow themselves to be in these kind of films. Like, they were always much more based on the idea of, oh, this was a lived reality at some points, so I have to take it seriously. And sometimes in American westerns, you got a sense of them not being quite aware of the fact that this is pulp based on history that you're kind of lying about. A lot of the time, there's like a self-seriousness to some westerns that some directors could. That's the big thing with John Ford is there's a self-seriousness to John Ford that can be annoying. In the same way, Howard Hawks doesn't do that. He's actually much more about the characters, about the situation, and he wasn't smug about it at all. And the same way, like Andy Mann made a western. When he made westerns, he made these psychological westerns, and it was just like they were there, that thing, and that was it. But some directors I found could be a bit self-serious about them, try to be historically, significant in some way, which is not really what for Western. Yeah, a bit of it, yes, but you need to balance it up with other elements of entertainment, which is something Leone could just do. He just understood what you wanted from a Western because he'd watched them all as a kid. He understood what was the bad bits, what was the good bits. So I could go on and on and on for another hour quite happily about Once Upon a Time in the West, but I just thought this would be a kind of a good little video to do, and then just now go watch the film and enjoy it. It's wonderful. It's great. It's terrific. It's everything you want from a Western. So I hope you enjoyed this. I'll be back for another one soon. Bye for now.